We started out on our journey together with so much promise. I was immediately drawn to her. Her smile, her presence, everything about her made my world brighter. We were young and full of hope, believing that nothing could ever come between us. My long work hours were meant to secure our future, but I missed the signs that things were changing over the years. I became consumed by work, and it wasn't that I stopped caring about Claire. Our shared vision slowly drifted into separate paths. Then one night, everything fell apart. I was half asleep when her soft voice cut through the dark, almost lost in the sound of rain. But something in her tone grabbed my attention. "What did you just say, Claire?" I asked, feeling a sudden dread. She turned on the bedside lamp, her eyes avoiding mine. "I'm unhappy, Frank," she whispered, and those words struck me deeply. Her unhappiness wasn't just a word, it carried the weight of everything crumbling between us. As tears welled up in her eyes, she asked me a heartbreaking question. She couldn't even look at me. "I don't know why, Frank, I just am," she replied, leaving me struggling to understand. Frustration took over as I asked if she wanted to leave me. Her silence answered for her, and I felt a surge of anger. I jumped out of bed, unable to process her world-shattering revelation. Claire reached out, but I stepped back, not ready to comfort her. I felt guilty. "Do you or don't you want to be married to me?" I demanded, and she couldn't answer. Her silence told me everything. I was exhausted, so I decided to sleep in my office. I was too tired to continue the conversation, but then her frustration erupted. She shouted, "I want to feel loved." She said, "I want a man who wants me around, who makes me feel XY." Her words hit hard, and suddenly it became clear that someone else made her feel that way. "Doug," she finally admitted. My world stopped. I couldn't respond. I just sat there watching her cry. Doug was her ex, best friend. It sounds so cliché, but there's no way to fully describe the devastation of discovering that your wife and your best friend have betrayed you. Both of them choosing each other over you amplifies the pain beyond words. The only word that fits is pain. It's too painful for me to even try to explain. I wanted to respond, but I couldn't. I had so much I wanted to say, but it all felt meaningless. Instead, I left the room and went to my office. I locked the door and couldn't face Claire. I wasn't sure I could trust myself in that moment, so she followed me, knocking and calling my name, but I stayed silent, overwhelmed by the pain and images of her with Doug. Eventually she gave up, and I was left in the quiet, though not truly alone. Sleep eluded me as my mind replayed everything, trying to pinpoint when things began to fall apart. There were no obvious signs, no declining affection. Our relationship seemed normal, if not passionate, at least stable. Yet somewhere along the line, Doug had inserted himself into our lives. I never saw it coming, but I'd known Doug for nearly 13 years. We started out as friends and colleagues, working side by side until I got promoted. Our friendship survived the strain, but when he left for a new job, it made me realize just how much our bond had frayed. I hadn't noticed until that night when he began coming over less often. But I didn't notice it at the time. Now I wonder if that distance was the beginning of something more sinister. As the night dragged on, sleep remained out of reach. My thoughts kept circling around Doug, our friendship, and how everything had gone so wrong. Before I knew it, the sun was rising and I hadn't slept at all. Reluctantly, I got up. Realizing that avoiding the day was no longer an option. After using the bathroom, I returned to my office and considered calling in sick. I had no energy for work, so I lay back down. I heard my alarm go off upstairs. Normally, it would have signaled the start of my day if I'd been in bed with CLA. The alarm soon stopped, and CLA had I turned it off and stayed still, unsure of what to expect next. Then I heard her coming downstairs, and moments later there was a knock on my office door. "Frank, are you awake?" I pretended to be asleep, hoping she'd leave, but she opened the door and came in. "You're sleeping. What do you want, CLA?" I mumbled without turning around. "I was worried about you." I snorted at the irony. She was worried after breaking my heart. "I'm fine. Go away." She didn't leave. Instead, she tried to talk about last night, claiming things got messed up. I finally sat up and faced her, noticing she looked just as sleepy. "I felt pretty messed up, and it was pretty clear that you'd cheated on me with my best friend. Do you want to be married to me, Claire?" She was really nervous and said, "It's not that simple." "Frank, our conversation was interrupted by our daughters, Kelly and Stacy, coming down. We decided to put the discussion on hold for now and get on with our morning routines. Despite the tension, we managed to get the girls ready for their day and then went our separate ways, avoiding any more talk about the elephant in the room. I decided to go to work, not ready to be alone with. On the drive, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and exhaustion. Once I arrived, though, I focused on work, pushing thoughts of Claire aside. Our company was on the verge of creating a new engine with greater horsepower and fuel efficiency, but it kept failing the tests. My mind immediately shifted to solving those problems. Thomas, my eager intern, met me at the door with coffee, ready to impress me with his ideas. He mentioned trying to reach me last night, but I cut him off. There was no need to think about CLA right now. We discussed his theory about the engine's cooling issue, and though we were all ready, I told him to keep going as I got ready for the day. I stopped by my assistant Sarah's desk and she noticed something was off and asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, but I didn't want to dwell on it. The day went on as expected, including a long meeting with the department heads. When I left work, it was dark outside. I started my car and enjoyed the smooth, quiet engine. It's a reminder of what I love about engineering. I prefer sleek, silent, powerful machines. Have you ever seen an ad for an Aston Martin or a Tesla? I doubt it, because they don't need one. Just sitting in one gives you a boost in status. A man's car reflects who he is. Muscle cars are all about showing off masculinity, while luxury cars represent wealth. Someone might park a Mustang or a Challenger outside their apartment, but a new BMW or Porsche, typically it's the kind of car you'd see parked outside a nice home, right next to their spouse's luxury car. I know it sounds superficial, but I grew up in a middle-class family. My dad was a mechanic and my mom worked at Walmart. We weren't poor by normal standards, but the high school I attended was in a wealthy area. Kids had everything: designer clothes, expensive cars on their 16th birthdays. Any problem they faced was solved with a call to their parents. My life was different. My clothes were ordinary and my first car was a Neon that I worked at Best Buy to afford. I wasn't poor compared to them, but I might as well have been. My advantage was that I was smarter than 95% of the school. I worked hard because I was determined to have the life I never had. My kids would be the ones others envied. Thinking about them reminded me of what awaited me at home, my family, my unhappy wife. The drive home the silence was making it impossible for me to get away from last night's conversation. Clay didn't feel loved by me, but Doug made her feel special. The anger and hurt I felt last night had now turned into a sense of detachment. I couldn't avoid it anymore. The drive forced me to dwell on it. I dreaded the confrontation, but I knew it was bound to happen when I finally walked in the door. It was a bit of an anticlimax. The girls were in the living room. Stacy was doing homework and Kelly was coloring. Clay was on the couch with her laptop, and the TV was playing SpongeBob. "Hi, Daddy," Stacy said while Kelly stayed focused on her coloring. Slay looked up. With a cautious expression, she tried to gauge my mood. "Hi, honey, how was work?" she asked, trying to sound normal. For the girls' sake, I decided to play along for now, but I wasn't going to pretend nothing happened. "It was work," I replied flatly. She nodded, accepting the uneasy truce I'd made. "You're a plate," she said. "It's in the microwave, but it might be cold now since you weren't here when we ate." Her tone hinted at resentment. Was this her way of justifying her actions? I had a long day at work. I had to earn for the family. We both had more to say, but we couldn't not say it. In front of the girls, the truce held, but the real confrontation was looming. Later, when the girls were in bed, CLA approached me in my office. "So, are we finally going to talk about this?" she asked from the doorway. I turned to face her. "Inside," I said, watching as she came in and closed the door. I sat on the couch, which had become my temporary bed. "I'm sorry, Frank. I never wanted to hurt you. Things have been off for a while, and I don't know what to say." "Start by telling me about you and Doug," I demanded, surprisingly calm. "I don't need apologies. Just tell me about your relationship with my ex." "Best friend." The anger I'd buried all day was starting to rise, and I was oddly relieved to feel something again. "It started about a year ago," she said, tearing up. "Doug has always been there, but I didn't start seeing him differently until then. You were gone so much after your promotion, and I felt overwhelmed doing everything alone. Doug started helping out just by being there. He was there to listen, and he was sweet." She even smiled nostalgically, which only made my anger worse. Is that how you justify this? I forgot your birthday, so you slept with my best friend. Does that make us even? We didn't have Zex that night. He just listened while I cried about how you were never around. When did listening turn into Zex? Don't try to blame it on me for forgetting your birthday. She stood up, her voice hardening. You think this is just about one birthday? What about all the anniversaries and dates? Nights and holidays you missed because of work? All the times you were physically here but mentally absent? You still haven't answered when the affair started. Around April, she said quietly. It's not the same. It's not like it should be. It's not like a wife should love her husband. I finished, for her tears streamed down her face as she nodded. We sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. Finally, she asked softly, So what do we do now? I sighed, my voice full of pain. What do you think we do? I knew what she was really asking. She wanted me to make it okay, to give her permission to move on, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I refused to clear her conscience or accept her. Betrayal. You want to leave, end the marriage? Fine, take the lead. Find a lawyer, serve me divorce papers, move out. Explain to the kids why our family is falling apart. You started this mess. You finish it, Frank. Don't play dumb. What did you expect me to say? That I hope you find happiness? That I'm sorry for forgetting your birthday? You cheated. Now you want to talk like adults? Adults don't cheat. Claire, now get out before I say something you'll regret. She left my office after that. If the situation was pretty straightforward, I'd have been served divorce papers the next day, but it wasn't that simple. About a week later, Claire started looking for a lawyer. Watching her do it was tough. She was searching online intensely, then leaving the room with her phone, which made it clear she was serious. I realized I had to find a lawyer too. My assistant Sarah referred me to Terrence Ross, our company's lawyer, though not a divorce lawyer. He could connect me with the right person. I met him at his office, and after we had a quick chat about my situation. My wife has filed for divorce. She cheated on me. I told him about my own messy divorce, and he said he sympathized. He'd been through something similar. He asked what I wanted to come out of this. Do I want to end things peacefully or destroy her? He told me about two options: Mike, the Navy SEAL, who resolves things quietly and efficiently, and Phil, the Marine, who scorches the earth and leaves nothing behind. Both had their merits, depending on how much I wanted to fight. I'm not sure yet. I told him it depended on her. Terry told me not to wait too long in divorce cases. He said that whoever strikes first usually gets the upper hand. He told me not to let indecision leave me at a disadvantage. I left his office feeling worse than when I arrived. I'd put the burden of the divorce on CLA. I secretly hoped she might change her mind, but seeing her pursue it so seriously made me realize she was done with me. Now I was facing my own decisions. I wondered if she ever really loved me. While I hesitated, CLA was moving. I had to make a decision. I had to choose between two options: try to win her back or follow my logical side. I had to think about protecting my assets and preparing for the inevitable. My brain gave me a clear to-do list, but hope held me back. I decided to wait for her next move, leaving space for her to change her mind. I didn't want to make things worse if she was unsure. I had to think about strength and a weakness. The next morning, I quietly dressed for work in the bedroom we used to share. I looked at Claire asleep in just a t-shirt. I looked at her and realized how beautiful she was and how much I'd taken her for granted. I suddenly wanted her in a way I hadn't in a long time. I touched her waist gently, but then she murmured, "Yes, Doug, yes." I'd never gone from aroused to crushed so fast. My heart felt like it was being stabbed. The bond of hope finally broke. I knew I had lost her. Our marriage was over. I was in tears. I left the room, ignoring her as she tried to call out to me. I locked myself in my office and cried harder than I ever had. Claire came in apologizing, but I pushed her out and slammed the door. I was fueled by rage. I drove to Doug's place and pounded on his door, ready to confront him. Neighbors peeked out, but I didn't care. My only goal was to hurt him as much as I was hurting. Then my phone rang. It was Claire. She told me that Doug had called the cops and that they were on their way. She advised me to think about the girls and my job. Despite my anger, I knew she was right. I couldn't lose everything over this. I left, but not before yelling one final threat at Doug. Driving away, I tried to suppress the tears. I was exhausted. I was tired of hoping. I was tired of praying for a miracle. Claire wanted Doug, not me. as I drove through a stop sign and nearly hit a mother and child. The close call shook me up a bit. I pulled over and realized I wasn't in the right frame of mind to drive. It was time to face facts. My marriage was over. There was no saving it. I took out Terry's card, the lawyer who had offered me 2 options, peaceful or aggressive. I called his office and I asked Frank, who was there with me, what had happened. Terry had called out Doug's name while I was touching her. I said, "Frank, you need to take a step back. Go to a hotel, clear your head. Now isn't the time to make decisions." He advised me to go to a hotel and clear my head. He reminded me that decisions made in anger are often regretted. I was right. I cared about what happened next and needed to think clearly before making any moves. I started calming down, realizing Terry was right. The last thing I wanted was to turn this into a war, especially with my kids caught in the middle. Despite everything, I still loved my girls and didn't want to make things worse for them, but I still wanted Claire and Doug to face consequences. For what they did, what do I do, Terry? I'm falling apart here. My heart is shattered, and they're acting like I'm the bad guy. What do I do? I slumped over the steering wheel, overwhelmed by the chaos in my life. For someone used to being in control, this was the worst feeling. Terry's voice broke through my thoughts. "I'm going to do something unconventional. I'm texting you an address. Meet me there. You need a drink." "I'm not sure, Terry. This isn't up for debate. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He hung up, leaving no room for argument. Minutes later, I got a message. It said, "Mario's Gentleman's Lounge is a strip club. My life's falling apart, and he thinks a lap dance will help." Inside the club, a glittery woman with a seductive voice greeted me. Her minimal outfit and flawless beauty made an impression. Despite my mood, I was there to meet Terry. I stammered, "You're Frank. I'm Starlet. Terry told me to bring you to him." She led me to the VIP section, her hips swaying as I followed. Terry greeted me with a drink, surrounded by beautiful women. The VIP area was calm with soft lighting and jazz music. Starlet took my hand and led me to a secluded corner. She led me to a secluded corner where she straddled me. Her touch sent shivers through me. "This is your first lap dance," she said softly, her eyes locked on mine. "Yeah, that's obvious," I replied, trying to relax. She laughed. "I haven't even started yet, sweetie," she said. As the music played, I let myself get lost in the moment for a while. My worries faded. Terry's plan to clear my head was working. After an hour, Terry cleared. The room fell silent. "Now that your mind's clear, let's talk. Think about what you want when all this is over. What can you live with?" I took a sip of warm beer, considering his words. "I just want what's fair, but most of all, I want to protect my kids." Terry nodded and handed me a card. "Call Mike tomorrow. I'll let him know to expect you." As Terry prepared to leave, I asked, Do you miss your ex? Terry, do you wish things had worked out?" He paused, a sad look crossing his face. Every day, he then shared his own regrets. He admitted he cheated on his wife and destroyed their marriage. "She's better off now, married to a school teacher. I'm a lawyer with money, but she's happier with him." Terry shook off his memories and mentioned the Starlet offered more than just lap dances. I asked if she offered other services, like dancing, to try to understand what he meant. He replied that it wasn't about money, but that she was great at relieving stress. I was still processing everything Terry said when he told me about Starlet. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but one thing was clear: I needed to move forward. I have to admit that after hearing what Terry said about Starlet, I saw her differently. I thought there was some kind of connection between us, but I didn't expect her to also be promiscuous. I wasn't thinking of anything serious, but it felt like there were sparks. The flirting, the hand-holding, the way she looked at me, it seemed like it meant something, but maybe I was just projecting. I saw Starlet differently. I knew she was a dancer, but I didn't expect her to also be promiscuous. I thought there was some kind of connection between us. Maybe there was chemistry, but I wasn't thinking of anything serious. It felt like there were sparks, the flirting, the hand-holding, the way she looked at me. It seemed like it meant something, but maybe I was just projecting. Flirting is part of her job, right? The idea of being with Starlet was tempting. She was gorgeous and I hadn't been with anyone in a while, but paying for it felt wrong, especially with everything else going on. So when Terry asked if I wanted her to come up, I declined. "Nah, I need to head out. Thanks for calling me down, Terry. I appreciate it any time. Frank, good luck." Doug walked into his office and nearly lost it when he saw me sitting in his chair. Doug, I said, trying to sound cheerful, how did you get in here? You've got 10 seconds before I call security. If you want to talk, fine, but this is my job. Don't mess that up for me. I wanted to knock him out, but I knew that wouldn't help. I needed answers, and violence wouldn't get me any. You've got a lot of nerve talking about not making trouble after what you did. At least he looked a little ashamed. I'm sorry, Frank. I really am. It's been eating at me. I'm struggling to stay calm. You're sorry, but what exactly are you sorry for? For stabbing me in the back, ruining my marriage, breaking up my family, and 133 years of friendship? I don't understand. He tried to explain, but his apologies sounded hollow. I know I betrayed you. I regret it, but what about you? You weren't there for her. She needed you, and you weren't there. I stood up to him and confronted him. He didn't back down. Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? That I had this coming because I was working hard to support my family? Doug kept pushing you. He didn't want a family. Frank, you could have made time for her, but you didn't. His attitude was infuriating. I was really annoyed by your superior attitude. You think you know what it takes to be a husband because you've been with my wife for a few months, but you don't know anything. You think you understand what it means to be part of this family, but you don't. I challenged him with personal questions about my daughters, and you didn't know the answer. You don't even know my girls. Doug, you only know what happens in bed with Claire, but marriage is about everything after that. Doug tried to respond, but his voice lacked the confidence it had before. Frank, I saved it. Doug, if you could betray me after 13 years of friendship, how do you think you'll manage a marriage you don't understand? I wanted to make sure Doug understood what it meant to protect a family. I walked out, and Doug said, I love her, Frank. I don't know if you believe it or not, but I love her. I stopped and shook my head. I don't ever want to see you again, Doug. This is your only warning. One day you'll answer for this. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but it'll happen. Then I left him, at least for now. Months passed, and the divorce process gathered pace. CLA had found a decent lawyer, which was a bit of a relief. We both carried on living in the house, with me using my office as a permanent sleeping space. We reached a kind of truce while the pain and anger lingered, becoming more of a dull ache. Occasionally something would trigger a flare-up. I started to get over it, but there were still moments when I heard her giggling on the phone or saw a gift I didn't give her. Those moments became less frequent as time went on. We interacted when necessary, mainly for the girls, to keep up appearances for their sake. We were friendly on the surface, but closeness was off limits. It was the best possible outcome in a bad situation. I know it's a bit of a cliché for a divorced man to throw himself into work, but for me it wasn't much different. I just didn't feel guilty about it anymore. I hadn't heard from Doug since our confrontation, and I was starting to miss the camaraderie we had. Making friends wasn't easy for me, and now I had no one but work. Claire, meanwhile, seemed to be moving on. It's a bit of a cliché for a divorced man to throw himself into work, but for me it wasn't much different. I just didn't feel guilty about it anymore. I hadn't heard from Doug since our confrontation. I missed the camaraderie we had. Making friends wasn't easy for me, and now I had no one but work. Claire, on the other hand, seemed to be moving on. I thought she was still seeing Doug, but I didn't ask. She'd go out with flimsy excuses, and while she wasn't trying to hide it, she also wasn't rubbing it in my face. I appreciated that, but it didn't ease the anger and jealousy I felt. She had the chance to move on, and I was stuck alone. It burned. It probably would have continued. Until the divorce was final, Stacy came into my office one evening. She said her mom needed the money for her cheerleading uniform the next day, because her mom had forgotten to give it to her. I vaguely remembered Calais mentioning cheerleading, but I hadn't realized it had progressed this far. When I asked how much it was, Stacy proudly announced $98. I was pretty shocked when I heard the price. I felt really guilty. I didn't even know she was in cheerleading. What kind of father was I that I didn't know about this? I realized that Claire had probably been covering for me, making excuses to the girls about my absence. But I wasn't a soldier away on duty. I was just choosing work over them. The truth was I enjoyed work more than I enjoyed being at home. I'd always justified it as I was working for them. But I couldn't keep lying to myself. I didn't have to work 80 hours a week. I did it because I wanted to. Facing this truth was hard. I realized I'd been hiding behind work, avoiding the responsibilities of being a father and husband. I closed my laptop and decided to change that. I got to hear the girls' joyful screams, and it was music to my ears. Later on, we sat in a restaurant with I'd eaten pizza, and there were empty ice cream bowls. I got a panic text from Claire. Emergency. Call me immediately. The girls are gone. I thought you were staying home with them. Please get home so we can find them. I quickly replied, letting her know they were with me. Thank God, she responded. Then another message came through. You took the girls out. I left the girls out. I didn't reply. My daughters were too busy singing Let It Go from Frozen, and I recorded the moment as the whole restaurant cheered them on for the first time in a long time. I felt connected to my girls. What my daughters did next completely floored me. Instead of getting embarrassed when they realized, the girls had an audience. Stacy stood up and bowed. Then Kelly did the same. They blew kisses as if they had just finished a Broadway performance. It was both hilarious and heartwarming watching them. I realized how much I had missed over the years while I was busy with work. If I hadn't taken them out tonight, I would have missed this. I'd also missed this precious moment. I didn't want to look back years from now and regret not having memories like this when my girls bring home boyfriends or fiancés. I want to embarrass them with stories like tonight. After the excitement died down, I paid the bill and we headed home. As we got in the car, Stacy said, "Thank you for the ice cream, Daddy. I like it when you take us out." "You're welcome, Sweet Pea. Thanks for the song." I replied, "You're the best daddy ever." She giggled before both girls quickly fell asleep. I drove home in silence, reflecting on her words. Kids rarely see their parents' flaws when they're young, even when they're neglected. When we arrived, the girls were already asleep. I texted CLA to ask for help. She came out and we carried our daughters to their rooms. Afterwards, we met in the hallway so you could take them out. I bet they loved that. "What did you guys do?" she asked. "We had pizza and ice cream, and then they sang for me. You should have seen them, Claire. They were amazing. The whole restaurant cheered them on. They even took a bow." I laughed, showing her the video. We shared a moment, but it felt strange being that close to her after everything. She stepped back, clearly feeling it too. "I'm glad you spent time with them. You should do that more often." She said that more often, her voice trailing off. "Yeah, I know. Tonight was a wake-up call. I don't want to miss out on their childhood. I've already lost you. I don't want to lose them too." She looked at me strangely, trying to gauge if I was sincere. After a pause, she said, "No matter what you do, they'll always love you. That's how it is. Kids are a different breed. Adults aren't like that." I said it without thinking, loud enough for her to hear. She looked regretful and she said, "Frank, don't start." I felt the urge to apologize, but I held back. Why apologize for the truth? Instead, I asked, was I really that bad? Clay bad enough for you to stop loving me? Of course I feel bad. Every time I think about the plans we had, I know I'll have to tell the girls soon, and it'll break their hearts. "I was the one who made all of this happen, so why did you do it?" I asked, tears in my eyes. "I was lonely, Frank. I had everything, nice clothes, a fancy car, but I was miserable. I just wanted to feel like I mattered to you. I wanted to know that you made time for me, even if it was just a small sign that you cared, but you always made time for everything else. Doug gives you that." She nodded yes. "He makes me feel wanted. He texts, he sends flowers, he likes being around me. Is that what you wanted to hear?" It wasn't, but I needed to know. "Well, soon you two can be together and ride off into the sunset." "Off into the sunset," I said, feeling bitter. "Frank, don't do this. What's done is done. Talking like this will only cause more pain." I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. "You set us on this road, Keeley. Now you want to avoid the pain." Her expression hardened. "In case you forgot, you neglected me first." I snapped. "I'm so tired of that excuse. You cheated on me with my best friend. Does anything I did justify that?" She had no answer, and her silence spoke volumes. "I pressed on tonight and realized how I contributed to this mess, but you didn't try to fix it. Claire, did you ever suggest counseling? Did you do anything to save our marriage? I came to you and you ignored me, so your next step was to cheat. If you cared about this marriage, why didn't you try harder? Instead, you gave up and found someone else." She started crying. "I couldn't do it anymore. I was drained. I'm tired too, CLA. I went to my office and closed the door. A few weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. And it was official. My marriage was over. The divorce itself was relatively amicable, but that didn't make it any less painful. The material assets were split fairly, with Claire getting the house since she had primary custody of the kids. I agreed to child support but to pay spousal support to the woman who broke up with me. Our family felt like a slap in the face. It could have been worse though, thanks to my lawyer. I avoided losing even more financially thanks to him. I was okay, but I felt like I had taken on the heavier burden. Claire may have walked away with the house, but I was left with the weight of it all. I thought about my girls and questioned the wisdom of keeping the truth from them. Why had I done that? We decided to keep everything on the down low instead of gradually preparing them. We were afraid of what they'd see if we told them the truth. I can't say that our secrecy was out of love, it was out of fear. I was done hiding behind excuses. I was done pretending my bad decisions were made to protect others. In reality, I was just a coward. CLA likely had similar reasons, but I couldn't let her. I used to make excuses and rationalize my actions, but my dad used to say that tomorrow's man is made by today's choices. I didn't really understand it at the time, but it's a great guiding principle. The man I am today is a result of prioritizing work over my family. If I don't like that man, I need to change him today. I wanted to be a good dad and successful at work. Why couldn't I have both? It was time to rebalance my life. No more choosing work over my daughters. So I did what I do best. I made a plan. I realized that if balance was my problem, there was an equation to solve it with 168 hours in a week. That's how much time I'd been spending. I was spending 80 hours at work, leaving only 88 for everything else, including sleep. No wonder I'd been failing as a father. I needed to allocate my time better. I owed it to my daughters to be worthy of their love. As I reflected, I heard Claire crying in the room we once shared. She was lying on the bed sobbing. I had the divorce papers nearby as I finally saw her express emotion over our failed marriage. It didn't hit me as hard as it once would have. I've been dealing with the end for a while, ever since she called out Doug's name in bed. Now reality was catching up with her too. I quietly closed the door and let her have her moment. Things were about to get more challenging. We still had to tell the girls. I needed a distraction, so I thought about Starlet, the woman from the club. Despite Terry's claims about her, I felt a connection with her. So I drove to Mario's Gentleman's Lounge, where I was greeted by a young woman. I asked if Starlet was there. She went to find her when Starlet arrived. She didn't seem to recognize me, which was a shame, but I kind of expected that. I told her I'd come in a few months ago and she made me feel better with her dances. She smiled and offered me another dance, leading me to a private area. She held my hand. I realized how I told her I wanted to rekindle that connection. We went upstairs to the champagne room. She asked what I wanted. I was honest and said I wasn't sure. She straddled me and whispered in my ear. She asked if I wanted more than a lap dance. When I said I did, she smiled and made her terms clear. A room, a ride after work, and $300. I had to decide what to do next. I booked a room by the beach with a balcony overlooking the ocean. It was peak season, so it cost $350 a night. I didn't want it to be too flashy, but still nice enough to avoid seeming cheap. She came out of the club around 2. I saw her by my car as she walked over. She looked different, but still the same. She was wearing glasses and had a simple ponytail. She said, "Hey Frank, I almost didn't expect you to show up." She smiled, but it seemed a little off. I opened the car door for her and got in. She touched my hand gently. "Do you have something for me?" I handed her an envelope with the money, which she quickly tucked away. We drove off. She complimented my car and asked about my job. I told her I was an engineer and she seemed impressed when she saw the engine in the car. But when she mentioned how good I was at my job, it made me think of the sacrifices I'd made to get there. She seemed to sense the change in mood, so I brushed it off and we sat in silence for a bit. When I asked if she was hungry, she declined, preferring to get straight to business. Her words felt cold, like this was just a transaction, which of course it was. When we got to the room, she shifted into her seductive persona, asking what I wanted to do, but I saw through it. I realized that it wasn't her. It was just a performance. The fantasy had shattered, and I wasn't interested anymore. As she tried to initiate, I stopped her, confused. She asked what I wanted, but I just wanted to talk. Frustrated, she eventually demanded I take her back to the club. She saw right through me, realizing I was looking for a girlfriend experience, not just Zach. When she mentioned my wife, the tears I'd been holding back finally flowed. She softened, realizing what was really going on. After I broke down, she comforted me, and we sat in silence for a while. After I'd finished crying, she apologized but made it clear that she couldn't give me what I wanted, only a Z-type emotional connection. I understood and didn't push it. As she was getting ready to leave, she tried to return the money, but I told her to keep it, even though there was no Z. She'd helped me that night in a way I didn't expect. As we drove back to the club, she suddenly suggested we grab a bite at IHOP. I agreed, joking about unlimited pancakes on the way. I asked her real name after a pause. She told me it was Cassandra, or Sandra, but she went by Sandra for short. We shared a light. It was a lovely moment. As I caught a glimpse of her smiling in the car window, I realized it was nice to have met her. I watched in amazement as Sandra devoured every bite of her food. Pancakes, eggs, bacon, all gone. She must have noticed my gaze because she looked up with an irritated expression. She asked her mouth full of food, "You just eat like a starving person. I was about to give you $1 and ask you to wash my windshield." She smirked, or at least tried to, considering her mouth was full. After swallowing, she replied, "Oh, so you're funny now. Weren't you just crying like a little girl an hour ago?" Something must have shown on my face because her expression softened. "Frank, I'm sorry, I was just joking. I didn't mean it." "It's fine, you're not wrong. I'm just dealing with a lot." She nodded, taking a sip of her orange juice. An awkward silence followed. "Do you want to talk about it? I might be a dancer and promiscuous, but I'm also a good listener." I couldn't help but laugh at her for a moment. I saw a vulnerable side of her that I'd never seen before, but it vanished quickly. Despite everything, I felt comfortable around her. I felt like I understood her, even though most of our interaction was superficial. There was a connection between us. It's a long, boring story. Trust me, you don't want to hear it. She smiled warmly. "You paid me $300 and bought me breakfast. I think we can rule out Zex, so let's think of this as getting your money's worth." We both laughed at that. And then I found myself telling her everything from the night Claire revealed she was unhappy to the night I met Sandra. She listened without interrupting when I finished, and then she said, "If you don't mind me asking, what about your ex?" My wife is a real witch. Surprisingly, it felt good to hear someone take my side for once. She continued, "I understand her frustrations, but sleeping with your best friend is low. You fight for something because losing it is worse than the struggle. That's the difference between love and everything else. Love is its own reason to fight." I was amazed by her. She noticed and laughed. "What a dancer can't be." I laughed too. "I guess you know more about life than most people." Her expression darkened more than normal. "What's that supposed to mean? You think I'm damaged because I'm a dancer?" I quickly clarified, "No, I just meant you've probably encountered all kinds of people with their stories. You knew exactly what I was after when I..." She walked into the club, which means she's seen others like me. She muttered something, looking down at the menu after a pause. Her mood lightened again. She looked up at me with a playful glint in her eye. "Would you let me get a slice of apple pie if I blew you?" I noticed how easily she switched personas. Sandra had built walls around herself using different identities to keep people at a distance. I saw through that and found her intriguing enough to try and get to know her better. "Have you ever been in love?" I asked. She stiffened, and her face clouded with sadness. Her reaction was enough to answer my question. She had been hurt before. I wanted to know more about her past, but she changed the subject. "Frank, it's late. I need to get home and sleep." 5. It's 0:00 a.m. "It's way past my bedtime," she said, redirecting the conversation. I hadn't realized how late it was. "Wow, it's 5 already." I checked my watch. Time had flown by. "It would cost you a lot more than $300 to learn about me." "What about $300 in breakfast?" I joked. She laughed. A real genuine laugh. "Frank, we need to go. I need sleep. Some of us have to work for a living." "In heels and lingerie, we'll compare notes," she quipped, making us both laugh. The waitress brought the check, and after paying and tipping, we left. The drive back to the club was quick, and soon we were parked by her car. "Frank, it's been a while since a man has lasted all night with me. You've got some stamina," she joked. She was back to her usual playful banter, but I wasn't going to let her dismiss the night with humor. "Sandra, you helped me tonight. I don't let many people in, but I'm glad I let you in. Thank you." For the first time, her guard completely dropped. She genuinely looked into my eyes and said, "Anytime, Frank. I hope everything works out for you. You're a good guy. You deserve better." She kissed me softly on the lips, a gentle, friendly kiss. then got into her car and drove off. I got back in my car and drove off. I went back to my hotel and decided to extend my stay for another night. I slept and felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in a long time. The pain was still there, but it was starting to ease. About a week later, I was back at my house. Claire knocked on my office door, sounding apprehensive. After my nights in the hotel, I felt clearer and like I'd turned a corner. I found it amusing that Claire seemed concerned about where I had been. I felt like I owed her an explanation. I reassured her that nothing happened, but I was done worrying about what she thought. I started preparing to leave my home, renting a storage unit and moving some of my belongings there. I also began searching for a new place to stay, considering a condo near work or a townhouse close to CLA and the girls. It felt like I was finally nearing the end of this ordeal until tonight. She asked me straight up, but I wasn't in the mood to deal with her, despite my tone. She took my acknowledgement as an invitation and walked into my office. When I turned to face her, it was clear she had been crying. Her face was puffy with dried tear stains. "I just wanted to check on you and see how you were doing." "How sweet," I replied sarcastically. The truth was I was furious with her tonight. We had broken the news to the girls about our divorce. We told a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. I'm sorry to say that it's been a year. It was heartbreaking to see their world turned upside down. Claire's unhappiness felt insignificant compared to the pain I had to put my daughters through. "So I'm just peachy, thanks for asking." "What do you want from me?" I snapped, tossing the pen I was holding onto the desk. It skittered off the edge with more force than I intended. You wanted freedom, and I gave it to you. You wanted half of everything, but you didn't know what you were asking for. I gave you alimony, child support, and our kids. What more do you want from me?" "I just wanted to talk." I laughed bitterly. "Now you want to talk too. It's too late. I had to break our daughters' hearts today. Tell them that Mommy and Daddy can't get their act together because Mommy slept with Daddy's best friend. I'm sorry, but I don't have any sympathy left for you. If you need comfort, find someone who doesn't care that you destroyed our family. Maybe your boyfriend." She looks shocked. "Do you have to be like this now, of all times? Can't you just be human? I was there too. I know you're hurting. Frank and I are both hurting. Who cares if you're hurting?" I shot back. "You made this mess and we're all suffering because of it. Go find Doug, your legs, and let him comfort you. He was really helpful when you needed to move on from me. I'm sure he can help you forget the pain you've caused our daughters. We both put them through this, Frank. We both played a part. Oh, and I worked too hard. And you slept with my best friend. That was totally equal." I couldn't stomach her excuse. "You're delusional if you think I'm going to accept that. I was lonely and you're an a-hole." She suddenly got up and left my office, storming out. "At least I'm not a cheater," I called after her. But she didn't respond. I knew she heard me, though. Was I being childish? I don't think so. It felt good, but it was just a way to vent my frustration. Looking into my kids' eyes and breaking their hearts is agony. It's a kind of pain that few things can compare to that night with Sandra. She helped me take a step forward, but tonight I took a big step back. The next day at work, I was called into another meeting with the higher-ups. I groaned when Sarah, my assistant, delivered the news. We had just had a meeting not long ago. What could they want now? "Calm down, Mr. Underwood, you know how they are. A bunch of pencil pushers. Don't let them see your frustration." Sarah advised, "What more could they want? I just gave them a progress report. They just let me do my job." She hesitated, then leaned in. "I don't think this is about the engine." I was intrigued. Sarah always seemed to know things before I did. "What's it about?" She smiled slightly. "Your old friend, Mr. Stamper, Doug." She nodded knowingly. I wondered how much she knew about my situation. She was aware of my divorce because she had referred me to Terry, but I hadn't shared details yet. Now she spoke to me. We were on the same side against Doug, so how did she know so much? "Why would they be meeting with me about him?" I asked. She lowered her voice. "I heard he stole some company secrets when he left. They might be planning to sue him or something." Hearing that Doug might be in trouble actually brightened my day a bit. Still, I couldn't believe he would be that foolish. "Why involve me?" I asked. She shrugged, but looked like she wanted to say more. She was about to say more when someone came up behind me. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Frank Underwood." A young man's voice said, "I'm Frank, how can I help you?" He introduced himself as Jason Morrison from the security company that's upgrading our system. He needs access to passwords, security logs, and other information, and will be around for about a week. I sighed. Jason, I'm swamped. My assistant is Sarah. Sarah didn't seem to mind at all, so I left them to it. I almost laughed to myself, watching Sarah's infatuation with Jason. It reminded me of how things started with CLA. Love begins with infatuation, all excitement and butterflies until it all goes downhill. I was brought into the boardroom, and it was clear this meeting wasn't just a progress report. As usual, Tur and a few other lawyers were there too, which made things more tense. Good morning, Mr. Underwood. I'm Terrence Ross. We have a few questions about a former associate of yours, Mr. Douglas Stamper. You worked together for years and became good friends, right? Terry knew. I'd already told him everything, but he was doing his job, making things clear for everyone present, including the stenographer was typing away. I remember him. We worked together and were friends, but I haven't spoken to him in months. What's this about? I expect Ed Terry to mention Doug's involvement in my divorce, but he kept the issues separate. Do you recognize this? He asked, sliding a paper over to me. It was a schematic, and my heart sank. I knew this drawing. It was the propulsion system schematic Doug and I had stolen from another. Intern Donald, this is bad news. I think I've seen this before, but I'm not sure why. Are you asking me this because you think I'm involved? I replied nervously, feeling the weight of past mistakes catching up to me. We believe Mr. Stamper developed this while working here using company resources. He recently patented it, and his company plans to launch it soon. If he created it here, we could claim it as ours. Wait, Doug developed this? I asked, stunned. I thought Doug had returned the design after we got hired, but apparently he didn't. Now I'm faced with a moral dilemma. Should I expose Doug for stealing the design? I thought about how he betrayed me, and I realized that my conscience would be fine. I recognize this schematic, Mr. Ross, but Doug didn't create it. He stole it. From another intern, the room fell silent. Nobody, not even Terry, expected that. So Mr. Stamper stole this design and passed it off as his own. One of the company heads asked Terry. Terry eyed me cautiously. Yes, that's exactly what happened, I confirmed. The stenographer's fingers flew across the keyboard. Who was this intern? Someone asked. Donald, I replied. I don't remember his last name. Did you witness Mr. Stamper stealing the schematic? Terry asked, his tone urging caution. Yes, I saw him do it, I replied. Terry winced slightly but continued taking notes. Terry summarized, Mr. Stamper and the intern went out for drinks, got drunk, and then Mr. Stamper stole the schematic from the intern's laptop. Is that correct? Yes, I confirmed, though I carefully distanced myself from the laptop destruction and theft. I admitted I knew about Doug's plan, but he said he'd been warned against it. The head seemed satisfied, and even Terry looked convinced. Thanks for being honest, Mr. Underwood. We'll contact Donald to verify your story and decide our next steps. We appreciate you being willing to testify against a former friend, one of the heads said with a hint of sarcasm, to which Terry responded with a smirk. I returned his look with an innocent expression. We can challenge the patent and get it revoked. We could claim the design. We need to find Donald immediately, another head said, clearly excited by the potential. I suggested they nod, discussing their next move. Frank, could this design help solve our current engine issues? Someone asked. Maybe if we bring Donald on board, I'm sure he could contribute. I had more ideas. I could see the satisfied smiles around the table. In the end, I helped the company while delivering justice to Doug. After all, who wouldn't enjoy putting a backstabbing former friend in his place? About a week passed before I heard anything more about the situation. By then, I had decided to bid on the townhouse near my daughters. I realized that living closer to them would help me stay focused. On what truly mattered, I decided to move to a condo near my job. I thought that might lead me to overwork and lose sight of my priorities. Passing by my old house daily would remind me to prioritize my girls. I was at an amusement park with my daughters when Doug called. My girls were busy indulging in snacks, so I stepped away. To answer, I knew this conversation probably wouldn't be suitable for the kids, so I asked Doug, "What do you want?" "You backstabber," he replied, sounding angry. "I know you told people about the schematic," I said, enjoying the chance to tease him. "You're an a-hole," he said, sounding upset. I remained calm, recognizing his desperation. "Hello, Pot," I said, reminding him of his own betrayal. If you hadn't tried to seduce my wife, you wouldn't be in this mess. He then tried pleading with me, asking for mercy. Frank, please. This is my livelihood. You're not like me. Don't let my actions change who you are. His begging was almost too good to be true. I decided to toy with him. Okay, I'll help. You have to stop seeing Claire. He was stunned for a moment, then reluctantly agreed, saying, You win, but I wasn't planning to help. You really thought I'd help you have a nice life, Doug? I said before ending the call with a smile. The next few weeks were busy ones, filled with work, time with my kids, and the ongoing battle to close on the townhouse. I was in a bidding war with a young couple, but I was determined to win for the sake of my daughters. The townhouse symbolized my commitment to them. One evening, while eating a meal Claire had prepared, she came. Despite our divorce, she still cooked for me, which I found surprising. Frank, can we talk? She asked, struggling to find the right words. She eventually broke down in tears, apologizing for everything. I'm sorry for what I did with Doug. I was so unhappy and I just wanted to feel better. I made a mistake. What started as a fling turned into something more complicated when Doug said he loved her. I listened, nodding as she admitted that she had fallen for him too. Crying as she spoke, I processed her words, noticing more how they affected me than I had realized. What she said months ago didn't affect me as much as I thought it would. I was pretty devastated when she told me she loved Doug, but now I'm not so sure. She said that she realized she loved him, but she still loved me. She hadn't planned to leave me when she told me about her affair. She said she wanted to work on our marriage, but then she ended up going along with the breakup when things got complicated. I found it hard to believe that you say you didn't plan on leaving, but I asked if you wanted to stay and you didn't fight for us. I replied, I know. I would have fought for the marriage for the kids' sake if you had, but I was also okay with it ending. I thought about our past conversations. Maybe it could have been different, but we'd never know. You didn't say that back then. Who knows if it would have changed anything, especially after you slept with my best friend. She nodded, wiping her nose. I know. I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve that. I regret my choices. I should have come to you before cheating with Doug. I suggested counseling or something. I owed it to our marriage and the kids to. I appreciate that it means a lot. I said that, and it did. She finally seemed to understand the depth of her betrayal. She couldn't undo what she did, but acknowledging it was all I could ask for. I was curious, so I asked what made you change your mind when I first read the divorce papers. I realized it was my doing. Telling the girls made it worse. I just knew I had to own up to my mistakes to move on. She explained, and I nodded. I've been there too, realizing how much I neglected you and the girls. Through her tears, she smiled. She said, You've been trying hard, and the girls love you. You're a great dad, even when you were busy. Well, you were a good mom, even though you cheated. We may have been lousy spouses, but our girls are proof we didn't completely fail. I joked, we laughed, and then she pulled me into a hug. That's when I started to truly forgive her. The anger and hurt were gone, replaced by a sense of nostalgic regret for what we once had. Now she was simply the mother of my children, someone I would always care about. Later at work, Sarah greeted me with an extra bright smile. I couldn't help but ask what had got her so happy. She was glowing today, beaming from ear to ear. She went out on a date with Jason, the security upgrade guy. I was surprised but happy for her. She shared all the details and it was clear she was smitten. I'm happy for you, Sarah. You deserve it, I told her sincerely, and she then offered her sympathy for I knew about my situation with Doug, but I didn't bring it up because I figured you didn't want to talk about it. I appreciated her discretion and made a mental note to ask her how she always seemed to know everything. The day flew by with work, and before I knew it, it was 8 in the evening. I was heading home to see my girls when I got tackled to the ground by someone. It was Doug, and he was on top of me, punching and shouting about how I'd ruined his life. His punches weren't landing well, but his anger was clear. I managed to push him off and stand up, and he was breathing heavily with rage in his eyes. He said, Donald is suing me, and your company is giving him a job. He said they're taking the design from me, and it's all your fault. He lunged at me again, and we weren't fighters. We were just two middle-aged engineers with pent-up anger. We were both middle-aged engineers with pent-up anger. We ended up brawling like kids, each punch fueled by betrayal and regret, trying to make the other feel the same pain we did. The fight between Doug and me lasted maybe 5 minutes tops. We were so out of breath you'd think we were reenacting a battle scene from Troy. Security soon pulled us apart. I was pretty mad, and it took one guard practically pinning him down to calm him. The guard holding me back, seeing I was calmer, warned me to stay put before going to help his partner. Did I feel better? A little violence doesn't solve everything, but sometimes it feels satisfying. Civility doesn't always work, just ask history. Sometimes punching someone just feels good. If it didn't, action movies wouldn't be so popular. My face hurt, and my right hand was probably swelling, but I felt like I needed that release. Watching Doug get restrained while he cursed at me only added to my amusement. The more irrational he got, the funnier it became. He only stopped when the guards told him he'd be charged with trespassing if he returned. It's funny how life works. Not too long ago, I was the one nearly arrested for confronting Doug at his home. Now the tables had turned. A month later, I won another battle. This time, it was the bidding war for the townhouse near my girls. I paid $110,000. I paid $10,000 over the asking price, but it was worth it. It wasn't as big as the house I shared with Claire, but it was perfect for me. It had a decent backyard, a nice park down the street, and a bike trail leading to the beach. Moving day was bittersweet. I was excited for a fresh start but nervous about the future. Luckily, Terry was there to help. It was a reminder that I wasn't the worst. My husband may have played a bigger role in his marriage's downfall, but that made him more relatable as we loaded the last box. Salah teared up, so I said, "This is it." She replied, "Yep, I'm finally out of your hair." I joked, for a moment I saw the CLA I married years ago. We'd changed. Life had changed us. The people we once were no longer existed. We were older and wiser now, ready to move on. Claire, I never apologized for neglecting you all those years. You deserved better, I admitted, tears flowing freely as she hugged me, crying on my shoulder. Well, at least you won't have to worry about the toilet seat anymore. I joked to lighten the mood. She laughed weakly as we let go. As I got into the moving truck, she paused before saying, "Frank, you're not the best cook if you're ever hungry. Feel free to come over for dinner. It would be good for the girls." I paused, then replied, "I don't think that's a good idea, especially if Doug's around. You don't have to worry about Doug. We're not seeing each other anymore." That was news to me. I wasn't upset. I'd love to hear what happened if you don't mind me asking. Doug and I were doomed from the start. His anger towards you and everything else just made it worse. I can't have that negativity around the girls. I thought about telling her that Doug had chosen his job over her when I gave him the ultimatum, but she didn't need that right now. Instead, I hugged her one last time and I got into the truck and drove away. Claire waved goodbye, and I headed to my new home after moving in. Terry and I decided to grab a beer. He asked if I wanted to go to Mari's, thinking of Mari's. That made me think of Sandra. I hadn't seen her since that night at IHOP. I thought of her often, but I replied, "Nah, let's hit A Sports Bar." The truth was, I couldn't face seeing Sandra in her starlet persona again. The real connection I had made with her wasn't at the club, but during that late-night conversation over pancakes and through her comforting me when I was at my lowest. The real Sandra was a complex, caring person who hid behind a tough exterior. She had been hurt too many times, but still couldn't help caring. Later that night, I found myself I was standing in the car park outside Mario's when I heard Sandra's voice call out, "James, if that's you by my car, you better walk away. If I have to call Bruno, it won't end well." I quickly raised my hands in surrender. "Sandra, it's me. I'm sorry for scaring you." She relaxed and came over to me. "What are you doing lurking around my car?" It was late, around 2 a.m. Morning. The street lights and Mario's neon sign gave enough light to see her face. I didn't know how else to get your attention. "Who's James?" I thought I saw a hint of a smile before her serious expression returned. "Why didn't you just come inside?" I nervously shoved my hands into my pockets. I put my hands in my pockets. I didn't want to see Starlet. I wanted to see you, Frank. "Sandra, just listen. I feel something for you. I don't know what it is, but it's something you were there for me when I needed you, Frank. I know what you're going to say. You don't do the girlfriend thing. You're not built for it, but those are just excuses." She didn't respond, just brushed past me and started getting into her car. "So you're just going to walk away?" I asked. She turned and glared at me. "Yes, Because I know how this ends. What do you see for us? Romantic dates and love in the moonlight? Then what? I go to work giving lap dances and getting groped. Then I crawl into bed with you like everything's normal. Are you going to introduce me to your parents? Your kids? Tell them how we met. I've been down this road, Frank. It doesn't end. Well, she got into her car, but before she could back out, I jumped in front of it and got out of the way. Frank, she shouted. I stood firm until she angrily got out. Sandra, I don't have all the answers, but I feel something for you, and I think you feel it too. We don't have for now, we can just be friends. I just want to get to know you better. She crossed her arms and looked away, thinking. I stayed silent, knowing I'd said enough. You're so annoying, she finally muttered. So is that a yes? I asked cautiously. She didn't reply, but handed me her phone and said, Just put your number in before I change my mind. Okay, great, I'll call you. I smiled as I entered my number. Her demeanor had softened, the anger fading. She stood with her hand on her hip, but the irritation was gone. You promised to call? I asked as she took her phone back. Stop being a little girl. I'll call. Now move before I run you over, she said, heading back to her car. I stepped aside, and as she backed up, she paused. She gave me a look, not quite a smile, but something softer. It wasn't starlit or the cold exterior. It was Sandra. Then she looked away and drove off into the night.